Okay, I am so excited to introduce our next speaker, TJ Gilmore. TJ is my hero. He is an amazing fellow. He's the mayor of Lewisville. He got up at 5 o'clock this morning to drive here. He's going to drive back and go to speak at 2 meetings tonight. He's created this great presentation for you, and he's doing the right thing on a municipality level. I mean, I think as Lynn said, small scale restoration is the key. Doug Tallamy says it too. We all say it. We need to build wildlife corridors. And one way to do it is to impact the residences. And TJ's doing an awesome job. He's going to tell you all about it. I wanted to say, I have to read the bio though. The March 2023 issue of Texas Monthly Magazine featured a story about the city of Lewisville's Roots for Wings program, which certifies residential pollinator and native habitat gardens. This program provides residents with training and education on site selection and preparation, plant selection and maintenance, and ecological benefits. The workshop is taught with the Native Plant Society of Texas, Denton County Master Gardeners, and Elm Fork Master Naturalists. 3 good partners up there working on this. In this presentation, you will hear from Lewisville Mayor TJ Gilmore, who was a major proponent of this initiative. He will explain how Roots for Wings expands the city's commitment to sustainability and is an integral part of its strategic plan. He will also review the program guidelines and partnerships and describe how the program is being implemented. So I want you especially to take notes on that so you can take this back to your cities and ask them to do the same thing. Linda Griffith is already working on Salado. So come on, guys, you guys can do this. We hope the attendees will take away ideas of implementing similar programs and strategies in their communities. Please welcome TJ Gilmore.
You'll be pleased to know that we are holding our second symposium today. It actually started this morning for our Roots for Wings program. So this is our second year. So we do it now because now's the time to start thinking about native plant sales, right? So folks, I am just one tiny voice, and it's an amazing community effort. I want to thank Pat Smith here, who's also a member of the Native Plant Society of Texas. Pat is actually the one who said, you should come talk to this group. So thank you, Pat, for doing that. And I need to give you some background because I did not come from, let's call it crunchy granola. I did not grow up in that environment. Actually, let me tell you about the environment I did grow up in. Next slide. Here we go. Come on. Maybe, maybe not. Here, let's try that one. Okay, there we go. I can work through that. Okay, this is where I grew up. Okay, now the other part of this is Yuma, Arizona, by the way, which is where I grew up in Yuma. Now, you can find luscious greenery in Yuma, Arizona, but it is pretty much iceberg lettuce. That we are the salad bowl of the United States. Now, of course, I do get this for a couple of days a year in my hometown. But that's what natives can do, right? They manage to survive. Now, we don't have as many beautiful, fuzzy, butterflies and moths. Our stuff down there was a little less cuddly, but it knew how to work with the environment and it knew how to stay alive and do what it needed to do. And we have plenty of that here in Texas. Now, for those of you who don't know, Lewisville is about 15 minutes north of DFW Airport. We sit right on the Elm Fork of the Trinity River. And we are at the crux of both. We've got that riparian area that comes through the Trinity River. We also have Blackland Prairie and Cross Timbers. So those are our native habitats. So we have a lot of variety and options available to us. But Texas is amazing in its biodiversity. Wouldn't you agree? So one of the challenges I think that we have as a kid growing up in Arizona, and this is what's really informed a lot of my decision making when we talk about sustainability in the city. These are just a couple of quick Google searches. One is water problems in Arizona on the left-hand side, and the other is water problems in Texas. And guess what? The West has problems with water. And I've been told that Texas is where the West begins. I think many of you saw in Georgetown, there was an article that came up that said Georgetown will be exceeding its baseline water by 2030, meaning they have to find other ways to buy water. My previous presenter, she was talking about water resources in North Texas and the politics that go with that and the challenges as well. Regardless, I've got friends and family that can't get water anymore. They live in extraterritorial jurisdictions where they had water trucked in from Tempe or Mesa. And now Tempe and Mesa says, well, we have to give water to our residents. We don't have it to give to these ETJ areas. So you got to buy water from somewhere else. Somewhere else is California, folks. So when you talk about growth and development, water is king. And we are already in Texas going to start bumping up against that. So we have to do things that are smarter. We shouldn't have to recreate what's going on in the West. We should be able to learn from that. So in 2011, I realized we had some limited planning in my city. There was a 2010 plan that had been put out there. And I said, I ran on this platform. We needed to refresh our vision, our direction. Where's the city going? Because if we don't have a plan, we just kind of flail about. And thankfully, our residents and the city council created something amazing. We created what's called the Lewisville 2025 plan. And as you'll notice here, it prioritizes extending our green space and creating opportunities for residents to get outside, which was critically important during COVID. We already had those resources available. Residents can get to parks. They were able to get to green spaces. It really helped with mental health. We learned a ton about what the outdoors brings to the indoors over those intervening years. And what you can see also in the middle, this green centerpiece here, of course, that's the floodway of Lewisville Lake, but it's also 2,600 acres that features Blackland Prairie, Eastern Cross Timbers, wetlands, hardwood forests. It's a whole lot of cool stuff. And it's managed by some amazing organizations. So you can see here we have the city of Lewisville, we have the University of North Texas, our Lewisville Independent School District has their outdoor learning area within that space. Of course, this is all U.S. Army Corps of Engineers space, so I've got to deal with the feds. Anybody else get to do that? It takes a lot of energy, but when you frame it right, when you have the great conversations, you can build champions even there and create these wonderful spaces. Of course, we've got the Native Plant Society of Texas, our Friends of Leela, which is our Lewisville Lake Environmental Learning Area. If you've not been up to Leela, come take a tour. We would love to have you. Anytime you guys come through Lewisville, just look me up. There's barbecue and a walking tour for Leela. Just let me know. I swear that is absolutely, we'll make it happen. And of course, our Master Naturalists at the Elm Fork chapter, all of these organizations started coalescing around this master plan, this 2025 plan, and this Leela area that we have to create a pretty amazing set of circumstances for our residents. Now, this little guy. In 2016, Lewisville signed up for the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. And we've done it every year since, and we've continued to stair step, and we're one of the top ones now as far as that goes. I thought, well, that's great. I'll sign that, not a big deal. That means I just don't hit them with my car. Maybe don't use pesticides. I mean, I really, folks, I'm gonna tell you, I'm not the brightest bulb on the tree. I signed this not realizing the impact of what a butterfly can mean. Now, you all get this. You guys have been in this space. You get it, but I didn't. And so I kind of taken you on this vision. We had butterflies. We had green space. I was like, okay, that's cool. We're done, right? So, when I look at where we are, I mean, we're right there. And that's not just butterfly migrations. Those are massive bird migrations. I mean, we are a super highway for all of these types of critters, and I'm thinking, well, we're supporting butterflies and birds. That's better than scorpions. And it really wasn't until I heard Doug Tallamy speak. He actually came to Lewisville. We had him as a guest speaker. I want to say around 2016, 2017. I realized that there's really a confluence, a linkage between my concern for water resources and how what we plant impacts not only our monarchs, but also all of our natives. I started to get the picture. I'm slow, but I got there. And what I realized is that I never considered that pledging to save monarchs really meant a bit more. And I've heard a few of you use this phrase. I feel like I came up with it, but I'm sure others have. We are Bucky's for butterflies. And by extension for birds and for everything else. But if we do the right things with our natives, we do amazing things for all those migrants that are coming through our areas. So, you know, when I look at this, I'm looking at how do we have fun? How do we make connections? How do we take somebody like me who goes, don't use bug spray, and turn them into a raving advocate? How do you get a politician to go, you know what? I might put up with things looking a little scraggly in the fall. Okay, because that's what we're fighting. That's the conversation we're having to have in the halls of our cities, right? Why does not everything look St. Augustine and like a British manicured garden? Well, because Texas ain't a British manicured garden. Ain't never has been, ain't never will be. So what it really meant is, while we're exploring ways to restore our natives, those same natives are helping us with water reduction. They're giving opportunities for species like the monarchs to thrive, and it's beautification without all the mowing and the maintenance. It's actually more cost-effective long-term for cities to take this on. So just a couple of quick pictures so you can see what we're doing. So this is Thrive Nature Park, and you can see we've got great native plants in there. We've had Nipsod in there. We've had the Master Naturalists. We actually bought this with fracking money. So what we said was, okay, not everybody can get out to the lake and the spillway, but we can bring this to the middle of the city, and we can take this 10 acres and we can turn it back into the prairies and the grasslands that it once was. And so you can see right across from our major Thrive Recreation Center, we have this beautiful 10-acre park. It's got walkways, it's got bird banding. I mean, we do all sorts of great stuff in this space. And you can also see that, you know, I call it eating our own dog food. We're practicing what we preach. Instead of having to find a gardener or a native plant demonstration garden somewhere, folks can see the natives right in their city, right at public facilities. I mean, I learned about frog fruit because I was standing at the corner of Main and Mill Street, and I'm going, how the heck is this still alive? And there it is, loving life, you know? So some of my favorite plants, I'm just walking around the city going, what is this? And I'm scanning a QR code. You know, that is so much more impactful than having to find and get through somebody's calendar to go find a garden demonstrator. I mean, I love them, and I love what our water, a couple Trinity Water does that. So I love that we have the ability to go see these demonstration gardens, and we need lots of them, but we also need to have impact right in people's faces. So we practice what we preach. And, you know, while the startups will cost you a bit of money, what we found is the long-term results are really obvious, and especially for grasslands. If you can see on the far right-hand side to your right, it has the most economic impact of any of the areas that we would want to redevelop. So trees cost a lot more than grass. Now, what's really cool about the grasslands, of course, is that we can take and we can look at carbon sequestration. There's a lot of different tools we can use to show the economic value. But all of these restoring back to the native habitat actually have higher economic value than, again, those formal British gardens we all keep trying to keep alive out here. So we've got stats, and these are coming from UNT. So we have had a great partnership with our friends at UNT, and they're actually driving the science, because this is a citizen science initiative, what we're doing in the city of Lewisville. And I want to thank Chris Chastain. He's one of our folks at City Hall that actually built most of the rest of this slide presentation. So I have to thank the guy that I stole it from. But you'll see in 2022, we've got about $150,000 worth of funding for the first phase of installing native plants and prairie grasses along our medians and right-of-way areas as a fiscal year 23 action step. That came from our council. Council said, we want more of this. How do we do it? So the primary goal is to increase available habitat, promote biodiversity, and also decrease the reliance on mowing and water. Community education is critical to this, folks, because people are going to be driving along going, why are my medians looking fuzzy? Why is my yard supposed to look a certain way while the medians get to look a different way? Well, your yard could look like this. Let me show you how. So we're trying to reduce the reliance on that mowing and water use. And so what we did with those funds is that 150 bought mature plants, about 1,000 pounds of seed. We bought a flail mower, storage containers, volunteer equipment, solarization materials for a test, safety materials, refreshments for volunteers. We funded an intern program. Temporary signage and supplies for outreach events. So we got a lot done with about 150. Now, of course, that's just the seed money, if you will. We are absolutely investing considerably more as a city to make this happen. Now, when you look at phase one, it was pretty straightforward. Phase one, and I will get to the actual lawns in a moment, but we are looking at this. There's two tiers here. One is the city tier, because we have to emulate the behavior we want to see. And that's what happens all the time. We get into this finger pointing of, well, I can't do it because they can't do it, or he has to do it this way, so I have to do it that way. The city has to emulate what we want to see in our neighborhoods. I'm not taking things away from people. I'm giving them options. All right? Politicians will tell you, rule 101, don't take things away. Give people options. And so this is a twofold approach. One is the city side. The second is the lawn side, which we'll get to a little bit later. But the first piece of this plan was, okay, we want to start doing this at a macro scale. How do we do that? We've got to take a look at where we're going to do it. We've got to figure out how to convert it. We've got to assess the planting and the mowing strategies to figure out what our costs are. And then we're going to engage. So we've got to educate the community. What is this thing? Why is it looking a little fuzzy around the edges? What am I reading when I'm walking past it? Those are the key pieces. So we sent a team out in October of 22 to survey the medians before we did treatments. It involved documenting the plants and wildlife and how abundant they were, the information we used to determine how to move forward with the conversions. So staff began to treat the chosen sites. We used 3 different methods. We did shallow till and seed, we did solarization, and then we also did planting directly in the ground. Okay, and all of this is being mapped by iNaturalist. This is all being mapped by UNT. So we're getting multiple ways to actually see what the impacts are. We're not just throwing stuff in the medians and hoping it grows. So over the course of the last year, our staff observes what methods performed best, and we took notes of which species sprouted and which didn't. We then started with a seed mix that we thought was the best fit and selected the environment, and then formulated a new seed mix. So we actually have an urban seed mix built for Lewisville. We also dealt with cost considerations for labor and how we could better replicate these results in the future. So this first phase is, okay, we're going to do this across the whole city. Let's make sure we get the right way to do it so we can build that model. And quite frankly, we believe the model is replicatable. We also think that the community events are key. So we have Colorpalooza, we have an event for Mariposas, we have our Keep Lewisville Beautiful events. So we have half a dozen events throughout the year to showcase what we're doing and get people educated, not to mention the education that's going on with our school districts, and then just the neighbors talking to neighbors. So all of these are happening simultaneously, and we're going to continue to repeat these 4 steps as we go forward. But folks, these are key. Planning is the key to all of this. Without planning, without solid plans, we're just throwing seeds in the ground and we're hoping they sprout. We're not giving them the best opportunity. So you can see here one of our projects. We've got 8 different plots. So this is our Garden Ridge Boulevard. Garden Ridge Boulevard is a north-south road, divided road. It's 2 lanes on each side, 3 lanes on each side. But it is a giant thoroughfare for electrical lines. Just a big green grassy lawn, or it has been. Now it's a big green prairie. And we're really excited. So this year will be the first year, but you can see there's a walking trail if you can kind of look closely through there. But you see that green ribbon going all the way through there. And you can see that we've got different plots planted, solarization, all the different pieces in the puzzle there. You can also see that this other small plot here is a small median, but again, a pollinator garden along our Prairie Creek. This actually is not far from my house. Now, when we talk about solarization, this is what we did. You don't know how many calls I got about this. what are we doing? What the heck is going on? How do we, but y'all, I don't think I have to explain solarization. We're just nuking the soil from orbit and hoping everything dies. So we tried it, and I'm going to show you some of the outcomes of that. We used about 22 rolls of 6mm, 10-foot by 100-foot tarps, 1480, 40-pound topsoil bags. So a lot of topsoil. We used the topsoil bags, as you can see, to actually hold down the material until we baked it long enough. It cost us about, $5,600 for half an acre. Of course, everything purchased at the local hardware store. That's not cheap. That's not cheap. So let's talk about it. What we can do, though, is once we did that, we started looking at what came up out of the ground, right? And I'll go back to the dollars and why you would use solarization versus others, because based on that slide, probably not a great tool for large scale projects. But when we look at what we're doing, here's some of the plant information by the numbers. We're seeing 142 plant species as of August 2023. We started with 33. And this is where iNaturalist becomes a really great tool, because it shows your elected officials that, yes, we're making change. We're making measurable change. And so I would absolutely, folks, if you're out there, get your teams, if it's not iNaturalist, something else, get your folks out there getting engaged with outdoors. And being able to pull this data is going to be really important to show what we're doing and measurable. And quite frankly, it's the kind of data that grant writers love to have. So if you're looking for grants, this is a good thing to do. You can also see that while we were really focused on native wildflowers, we had 142 plants that got observed. All this increase in plant richness brought about a variety of insects, spiders, and birds. So while we started with the natives, it created that foundation for other organisms to thrive all along the pyramid. We all know this, but this is the measurement. So when Doug Ptolemy talks about those numbers about when you plant an oak, you get this, he's not wrong. By far, he's not wrong. And we have the measures to see it. So we ended up with 266 taxa, 142 plants, 86 insects, a variety of spiders, birds, mammals, and fungi, all been documented primarily in the shallow tilled and seeded spots, okay? Which tells me that the solarization absolutely did what it was supposed to do, which was nuke everything, right? So this actually doesn't have to come back from absolute zero. This stuff had a lot of taxa already there, so it just helped to emphasize that. So you can actually see when the seeded plants started blooming by the increase in observations in this chart. It's pretty straightforward. Now, I'm not going to ask you to read this slide, but this slide is available for folks. So we have a bunch of recommended plants. And again, this is for the North Central Texas natives. So your area, of course, we have amazing resources. You all are some of those amazing resources, being able to create that. But this is our urban seed mix. So this is all the plants that we have in our urban seed mix that we got created. So we were really excited about it. I mean, we have to look at how effective the germination is from seed. We have to consider the height that it grows and what the setbacks are, because I still have sight lines that I have to deal with road medians. So I can't have that right up on the curb. But you know what? A nice 10-foot mown border takes down a lot of those problems. And it helps with the folks that are not quite there yet, because it does look structured. I know I've been to enough of your meetings. I know you guys, the secret is, well, you don't want the city to come around, just throw a border around it. I know the tricks. So guess what? We're just throwing a border around it. It just happens to be mowed grass. So, it's amazing how those things work. Now, we'll talk back to the solarization. It kills many of your pests. It removes weeds and highly invasive grasses. It creates that organic matter and fresh substrate for your seed, and you don't need any chemicals. Of course, as we all know, it's going to kill beneficial plants and insects. It's going to create plastic waste. That plastic has to be held in place during our storms, and it is costly and difficult to do on a large scale. So small plots, heavy invasives, that's when we think solarization makes the most sense. Usually late May and remove in September just before seeding and planting. That's our recommendation if you're going to solarize. But we're having great success with the till and seed and just seed. So in 2023, we have new pollinator areas. So we have we have a 1 acre garden giving for green spaces. And then we have Lori Clark Adopt a Spot. So if your city has an Adopt a Spot program, this was a neighbor. Both of these were citizen initiatives. Citizens who came, they saw our native plant programs, they saw our yards, and they said, hey, there's some space in my neighborhood. Can we do a pocket prairie? How do we make that happen? So we took some neighborhood grant money that's usually done for neighborhood improvements, and we put it into this. And now we have champions that maintain that in the neighborhood. They speak to their neighbors about it. It's not the city telling them what's going on. It's their neighbor. And that's the only way we're going to move the needle on this, guys. We've got to get our neighbors on board. We're also adding another 24 acres of additional pollinator areas. So these are along 2 of our main arteries. So we're adding a lot more of Garden Ridge. And then we're adding our 407 to College Parkway. So folks, when you come to Lewisville, you're going to need to take a driving tour because we're going to have a whole lot of new green space this year. Now, education's key. If we're not telling people what's going on, it's change. And I don't know about you, anybody here a politician? When something changes, my phone lights up. It could be $100 money bush that people can freely pull $100 bills off of, and my phone would light up complaining. So we've got to do education and outreach. We've got to do good signage. We've got to give people resources. And of course, being able to throw a QR code on something so they can get more information is outstanding. So you can see here, we're talking about rain gardens. We're talking about pollinator gardens. We're talking about no mowing. This is why it's looking a little fuzzy. This is the purpose of this. And we find that this helps a ton. Now, Roots for Wings. Of course, we've got the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. But this past month, I got my NIPSOT newsletter, and Chelsea Scheifler from the Dallas chapter had a small article in there. It was on Valentine's Day, and she showed off her skills. I was incredibly proud because this is what all of this is about. Chelsea talked about her wonderful work making her garden native and being the first Roots for Wings certified yard in Lewisville. So these things take time, right? We got the 3-year window where we plant a native, and it takes 3 years before it really is happy and healthy and doing what it's supposed to do. So having Chelsea plant those seeds, be the first, and then write about it, that makes this worthwhile, because she is now that exhibit in her neighborhood. And when people walk their dog or they're roaming the neighborhood and they want to know what she's doing, she can help them. And she's got a passion for it. All of you have that same passion. But that's how we make this happen, yard by yard, city by city, town by town. It has to happen when that one individual person stakes out a couple yards in their yard and plants natives. So the Roots for Wings program is pretty straightforward. What it does is it's a full-day symposium, and folks learn about all the different native plants, where they go, shade, not shade, all of that good stuff. And I'd say all. Yeah, we give them a binder. It's a binder of a good 100 plants, you know, how to treat them, what to do. I mean, I learned so much about fall asters. They're my favorite now. I didn't realize they needed as much work as they do to get where they go, but they're amazing plants. But again, we have folks with passion just like you teaching this program. And then our city staff comes back and helps to certify the lawn. Because the issue really comes down to, well, I don't want to mow my lawn, so that's native habitat. And that doesn't do it, right? I see some heads nodding, all right? That we still live in a neighborhood. We still have expectations of maintenance and how our homes should look. So we have to understand that those rules, those behaviors are still there. So how do we work with that? And we work with that by creating a program that is educational, that is certified by the city, that isn't onerous, but it allows, you know, there's a sign in the yard that says, hey, I'm a certified neighborhood garden. And that's how we're going to move forward. Whatever that looks like in your community, but there needs to be something like that, because you will have folks that will want to game the system. And they'll just say, this is native habitat and I'm not doing any maintenance. And now you get people ticked off. And what happens? The birds and the bees die because the community says enough's enough. Okay, so we have to find a way to balance that. So I was so proud of Chelsea, and I don't know if she's watching today or not, but I couldn't be happier to see her putting her testimonial out there. Now, another thing that we do in our city is that we have an education and outreach website that talks about all of this stuff, but we also map it out. So if you want to know what's going on, you can see a map of everything that's there. This is also cool because I see people using it to go see how they might lay out their plants, right? So they might learn a different setup or something that works for them. But you can see all that on our city website. You go to cityoflewisville.com and you can just type in pollinator and it'll pull up whatever you need on there. So I'd encourage you guys to take a look if you get a chance. And of course, none of this happens without Native American seed. Of course, massive champions and you know, having the Niemans and the Marcuses having lived in Flower Mound, of course, they understand the prairie and the land that we have in Lewisville intimately. So they worked really, really closely with us to create the seed lists. And again, this is something that they have standard. You can work with them on that, but this one works for us. So if you're a North Texas city, this is a great one. We'd love for you to call it the Lewisville seed mix. But I know. So you keep doing what you're doing. Now, what's next? So we're going to complete the seeding and conversion of existing and new pollinator areas. We have existing 11 acres. We have new 25 acres. We're going to continue to monitor those sites and record our observations on plants and animals. We're going to continue to train our staff and volunteers to utilize iNaturalist. And we're going to continue to host outreach events to educate our citizens and enable them to participate. If you're looking for how to do that, reach out to of course, our NIPSOT fans, reach out to our Master Naturalists, reach out to Keep Lewisville Beautiful. They all have great tools and programs in place that are really easy to replicate and low cost to no cost. So if you're looking for a leg up on that, we've got great resources. Reach out to me. Just Google TJ Gilmore. There's two of us on the internet. One's a professional baseball player. That's not me. So, but when you look at it, we kicked this off with the thought that, you know, we're in Texas Monthly, and this wasn't the print version. This is the web version, but still, I feel like we're kind of onto something. Once you're in Texas Monthly, you're kind of a Texas thing. So I was really proud when we had that. We couldn't be more example for others. And again, this is not about forcing people up to change. It's about giving people the knowledge to make smart choices. And with that, I will take questions. Yes.
Okay, for the online questions, where's the messages? I'll get rid of this. How do you ensure mowing is done properly?
How do we ensure mowing is done properly? So we have two different groups of folks that mow. One are city staff, then they do limited stuff. And the other is a contract folks. And you know what? They have mowed over historically a couple of areas. There's a learning curve. So yeah, you have to be careful on that. So what we do with our contractor is we sit them down and we have an education with all of their folks on what the expectations are and how to do it. Is it perfect? I don't know. We'll find out this year. But last year it worked really well. But again, it's sitting down and saying, hey, these are our objectives, these are our goals. And I think you'll find that many of these companies, while some of them may just want to blitz through everything, I think many of them understand what we're trying to do, and they're finding that it's actually beneficial to them as well. So it's a dialogue that you have to have with those vendors. And quite frankly, since they are a vendor, you got money to hold them accountable to it. Yes.
And the second online one is, have you considered supporting local artists to create public sculptures in your project area?
Have we considered using local artists to create public sculptures in those areas? So the answer is yes, our arts board does that. So Leela has murals as well as some sculptures that are out in the walking and hiking trails. We have done painted crosswalks. We have done a couple of bird programs out there, bird sculptures in the nature park. One of the things we do is we actually have a small bit of money on all of our capital improvement projects that goes to public art. And so if we build a building, it has a public art component to it. So yes, absolutely. And a lot of that art has come from UNT students. So that's part of that collaboration. Question here, sir.
Part of our state leadership continues to say Texas population will double in the next 10, 20 years. How in the world can they get away with that when we don't have enough water for the people that are already here?
So the question is, how do we get away with our population actually doubling within the next, by 2050 is what I'm hearing. But that's a serious problem. Thankfully, Texas, of all the states that I know, does water planning incredibly well. So I think we will have infrastructure available for that. The reality is, as long as we have the business environment that we have, we're going to continue to have people move here, whether we want it or not. The environment is driving that. So we need to plan for it better. I don't know how we stop it without creating economic mayhem. So I don't think that's something that's going to change too quickly. I think what we have to do, it's incumbent on us as municipalities to be able to plan for that and be able to support whatever's coming down the pike. Because if they are going to be here, I got to deal with it. And as I heard earlier today, you know, these people are moving here and they're not bringing water or streets. So how do I deal with that? I wish there was an answer, like a silver bullet on how do you manage that. But I think the key is we have to have strong water policies in place. We have to have programs like what we're doing here in Lewisville to do water reduction. And we have to get people more understanding about the space that they use and what are the trade-offs between that. I think one of the challenges that we have in Texas is that we do incentivize sprawl. And we incentivize massive sprawl. And so that is probably, if we're talking at a state legislature level, that's probably the conversation that needs to happen, is how do we, if we're going to have development, how do we have it smarter? How do we have it less sprawl so it uses less resources?
People need to vote.
You're absolutely right. So people need to vote. And now we're off into politics, and I'm trying to stay over here on plants. But I get you. I get you. Thank you for that. Yes, ma'am. So the question is, how are we dealing with deer on how we protect landscapes? Thankfully, I am highly urbanized, and so most of the large freeways take care of that issue for us. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a concern for different regions. And if you go a little bit further north, it's definitely a concern, but we do not have that issue as other areas do. Sorry. Yes, ma'am. Did we have to change our current ordinances or make exceptions? So the way we did this is we created a program to certify native habitat lawns. So all of our ordinances have stayed the same on lawns, unless you do this, and then you can be certified and you can live outside of the normal ordinance box. So the follow-on question is, what about private companies? We incentivize them to use natives when they bring their designs to the city. So they actually get cash deductions and those types of things. Small one. Back over there. Yes, there. So the question is, have I had to work around existing natives to work around that to expand more native habitat? This fair summary. I think for our larger trees, that's definitely been an issue. Some of our larger trees around Lake Park and that area. Frankly, we're a first ring suburb, and we pretty much nuked most of our natives long ago. So we didn't have a whole lot of change to deal with. I think our biggest challenge is making sure we keep the natives out of our prairie restoration areas. So we get privet and all that other lovely stuff that you all are familiar with. We're constantly fighting that battle. So really, I think our battle is much more on the invasive side, and getting rid of those. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So, and I'm very active with Parks Department and I'm, and many people are, okay, what you guys are doing, it's amazing. So do you ever just, knock on Dallas's door and say, can I show you what's going on? I know it takes, but do you guys try to share it with them or do they have to ask for it? Are you spreading?
So I'm going to reframe the question just a little bit. Are we spreading the gospel? So I am here. But some of this is preaching to the choir. I get it. Yeah, we're absolutely talking to our neighbor cities, and we're having other cities actually come to us and ask. As regards Lewisville's largest suburb to the south, Dallas, we would love to work with them. I think there are pockets in Dallas. It's just they are so big they can't be as agile as a suburb of our size. We're the 12th largest city in the Metroplex. We're the 28th largest city in Texas, 132,000 people. So we can be a little more agile. I think since we are so new onto this and we're having such great success, we're starting to see it at other symposiums, at other city by city and parks departments. Since our parks department is so driven by this, I think that's key. So yes, the word is getting out. We're excited by it. And I think maybe we've got time for one more quick question. One more online?
There's actually two questions about your stats. How is your success rate for solarization of Bermuda lawns? And do you list the resources on your list?
So the question is, what is our success with solarization of Bermuda lawns, and do we list resources on the website? So you can talk to our folks. I think this slide deck is on the website. So the slide deck for this presentation talks about the only solarization project we did was that large median project, which is a ½ acre. So while we found that it was effective, we also found it was costly. Yes. Does it work on a lawn? Absolutely. But you know what? If I'm a lawn owner, I'm probably going to go cardboard. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna go, do a cardboard thing and go that route. I think the plastic is overkill, but again, we wanted to try it and see if it worked at that scale. So last comment was TJ for president, and I did not plant that, and my wife is not online. Thank you all. And folks, I will be around for lunch. I do have to drive back, but I'll be around for lunch. If you had questions, please see me out in the corridor. I'll do everything I can to answer. Email me. I'm super approachable and easy to get a hold of. So thank you.